Welcome to the Group of Five Focus podcast, where we take some time each week to highlight a few significant G5 matchups and showcase the power of the Group of Five. I'm your host, Brian Doppel. In this episode, I'll recap the action from Week 11 and preview a few Week 12 games, including a few MAC and Mountain West rivalry games. And some guests will join the show to preview my game of the week, South Alabama at Southern Miss. We'll get into it after the break. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and much more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place, and best of all, Anchor is totally free. Let me tell you from personal experience, when I first started this podcast, I knew about Anchor, but I wasn't sure if it was exactly the right tool for me. After a little poking around, I found that in fact it was. And when I had some questions when I first started my podcast, Anchor support was there to help. So if this sounds like it might be the tool for you to start your podcast, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. All right, let's begin this week by congratulating the teams that became bowl eligible this week. So thanks to @collegefootballhome for these tweets every week. They're super helpful and interesting as we're getting to this part of the season where bowl eligibility really becomes a focal point. So these G5 teams became bowl eligible this week, and those are SMU, Houston, Marshall, and if they were eligible, #FreeJMU, James Madison would have become bowl eligible this week as well. So congrats to those teams as we get into our weekly recaps and previews here. Let's go ahead and take a look at the American Athletic Conference, where on Thursday night, Memphis hosted Tulsa and got a nice win, 26-10. ECU went to Cincinnati on Friday night and almost had a very cool comeback win, but Cincinnati held them off and won the game 27-25 there in Nippert Stadium. On Saturday, UCF, number 22 UCF, went to Tulane and beat the number 17 Tulane Green Wave 38-31 there in Ullman Stadium in New Orleans. So UCF just rolling here at this point of the season. They improved to 8-2 and 5-1 in conference. So UCF seeming to have a scorched earth policy when it comes to their final season here in the American Athletic Conference. Navy put up a good fight against number 20 Notre Dame, but ultimately lost 35-32. SMU had a solid win, 41-23 over the struggling South Florida Bulls. And Houston got a big win, although they allowed 36 points to the Temple Owls there at home in Houston. Looking forward to next week in the American Athletic Conference. On Thursday, SMU is going to Tulane to see if they can take a bite out of the Green Wave. Tulane's favored by 3 points in that game, but we'll see what SMU quarterback Tanner Mordecai has to say about that. I think that SMU has a good chance to, unfortunately, extend Tulane's losing streak there after that tough loss to UCF. But I think this will be a very interesting game and a close one for sure. We have another American football game on Friday night as USF goes to Tulsa. So these are two teams that are struggling in conference this year. USF at 0-6, Tulsa at 1-5. Tulsa's a big home favorite against South Florida, which is just having a ton of struggles here at this point of the season. On Saturday, Navy and UCF are playing. UCF is a big favorite in that game. They're at home at the Bounce House, so I don't see anything particularly wrong with that. Houston is going to ECU. ECU, the 6-point favorite at home there in Greenville against the Cougars. So that would be an interesting game to watch. That's at 2 p.m. on ESPN+. I think that'll be a great game. Memphis is hosting North Alabama in a game that doesn't even have a line or an over-under. So Memphis better roll there against the what are they at North Alabama? The Lions of North Alabama. So should be a good beatdown, a nice morale boost to finish out the season here for Memphis. And Cincinnati's going to Temple. Cincinnati are 17-point road favorites. So that should be an interesting game, although Temple just put up 36 points on Houston last week. So it looks like Temple can score in unique ways. So we'll see if the Bearcats can hold them off. Moving on to Conference USA, Western Kentucky on Saturday had a really nice solid home win versus Rice, 45-10. Charlotte went to Murfreesboro and lost to Middle Tennessee, 24-14 on the road. UTSA hosted Louisiana Tech and beat the Bulldogs bad, 51-7, to improve to 8-2 overall and 6-0 in Conference USA. So the Roadrunners are really just rolling there. They appear to be taking the UCF scorched earth policy to Conference USA on their last season before switching over to the American next year. Speaking of switching over to the American, UAB and North Texas played on Saturday, and UAB had a huge win, 41-21. North Texas, a team who I described as sneaky good last week, just had a bad week. They scored all 21 points in the second quarter of this game and were completely quiet for the rest of the game, and UAB is just too good for that. So they were able to be a little more consistent, score throughout the entire game, and UAB is just one win short of bowl eligibility. Florida Atlantic and Florida International played in the Shula Bowl this week, and all the experts were saying Florida Atlantic was going to run away with this one, and the experts were right. The Owls beat the Panthers 52-7 at FIU this year. So, to my understanding, the last scheduled Shula Bowl for a while turned out to be a pretty ugly one for the Panthers. This coming week in Conference USA on Saturday, UTSA is going to Houston to play Rice, and they're 13-point road favorites. Although Rice is apparently an interesting team this year that can score and win in unique ways, so I wouldn't be surprised if it was a little closer. I would probably take I might take Rice to cover there, but it should be an interesting game. The Roadrunners are looking to stay perfect in conference, and we'll see how that goes. That's at 1 o'clock on ESPN Plus on Saturday. Louisiana Tech and Charlotte are playing this week in Charlotte at Jerry Richardson Stadium. That's going to be a close game between two Conference USA teams who are just struggling right now. Florida Atlantic is going to Middle Tennessee State. FAU are 6-point road favorites. They're actually pretty comparable teams this year as far as record and statistics go. FAU is at 5-5 overall, 4-2 in conference. Middle Tennessee is 5-5 overall, but 2-4 in conference. So Middle Tennessee not quite able to get things done at home, or not quite able to get things done down the stretch in conference this year, but just coming off a nice win versus Charlotte, so maybe they'll be able to sort of roll that into some success against Florida Atlantic. FIU, coming off that tough loss in the Shula Bowl, is playing at UTEP this week, and they've got their work cut out for them. UTEP's looking decent this year at times, but they're 14-point home favorites, so the Miners definitely have the edge there at home in El Paso. An exciting game this week. Western Kentucky is playing at Auburn, a little SEC matchup for the Toppers. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in this episode. And UAB is going to LSU this week, so that'll be an interesting one too. LSU's number 7 in the country right now. Is that a little bit of SEC inflation? Perhaps. Can UAB upset the apple cart a little bit there in Baton Rouge? We will see. That game is on Saturday at 9 p.m. On ESPN2. Moving on to the MAC, of course, we had some midweek MACtion this last week. It's something that we've come to look forward to for the month of November. And on Tuesday, Eastern Michigan went to Akron and got a win by a touchdown, 34-28 there at Infocision Stadium in Akron. Also on Tuesday, Ohio went to Miami and won 37-21, a big win for the Bobcats, who are just rolling right now. They're 7-3 overall, 5-1 in conference. So Bobcats not expected by many to be towards the top of the conference this year, but they are really performing well. The last game on Wednesday was Ball State Toledo, and Toledo won at home by 7 points. Talk about consistency. Toledo scored 7 points in each of the 4 quarters of this game to take themselves over the Cardinals of Ball State, who are at 5-5, just one game away from bowl eligibility. And the rest of the MAC played on Wednesday. Northern Illinois went to Western Michigan and won 24-21 in Kalamazoo. Buffalo went to Central Michigan and lost 31-27. And Kent State went to Bowling Green and got a big win on the road versus the Falcons, 40-6. Bowling Green, who has had a decent season this year, just didn't have what it took to hold off the Golden Flashes of Kent State. So this is what MACtion is all about. There's so much parity in this conference, and the standings, especially in the Eastern Division, are just so tight all the way to the end of the season. So we will see, actually, as we look forward to next week, we've got a few interesting matchups as well. So it's this week, probably before this episode will be released. On Tuesday evening, Bowling Green is going to Toledo. Toledo's a huge home favorite, 15.5-point favorite at the Glass Bowl in this game. I think that will probably hold true. It might be a pretty big margin of victory like that, but it's MACtion, and Bowling Green has had flashes of greatness this season. Especially their passing game has been very strong. So we'll see what happens in Toledo on Tuesday night. Also on Tuesday night, Ohio is going to Ball State. Ohio a slight road favorite in that game in Muncie. So we'll see how that goes. Ball State, again, one win away from bowl eligibility. Ohio sitting at 7-3, 5-1 in conference. On Wednesday, Eastern Michigan is going to Kent State, where the Golden Flashes are 7.5-point favorites there at Dick Stadium. Miami is going to Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois, one of my heartbreakers this season. I expected them to be having a much better season, but they're sitting at 3-7 and 2-4. They're slight favorites at home, but you can still get tickets to this game if you're interested. They're as low as $3 right now. So go grab your $3 weeknight MACtion tickets and go get you to DeKalb, Illinois at Husky Stadium at 7 p.m. on Wednesday. But if you're a Michigander, you're probably more interested in Western Michigan at Central Michigan at Kelly Short Stadium in Mount Pleasant on Wednesday evening. That's at 8 o'clock on ESPNU. The Broncos having a disappointing season as well. The Chips, a lot of people had high expectations for them, but have just not been able to keep up with things. However, at home, they're 11-point favorites, so we'll see if the Broncos can make a splash there. And on Saturday, our lone MACtion Saturday game, Akron, sitting at 1-9 and 0-6 in conference, has to go to Buffalo to play the Bulls at UB Stadium. So that game is at 3:30 p.m. Buffalo sitting at 5-5. A win here would make them bowl eligible, which would be a very nice way to end the season for the Bulls, who have had some ups and downs this season. We'll see if the running game will carry them through, or if Akron's passing game is going to be able to get maybe their first in-conference win this season. It would be a tough one to get on the road at Buffalo, but stranger things have happened. We had a bunch of Mountain West football games last week as well. Fresno State on Friday went to UNLV and played at Allegiant Stadium and won that game 37-30 on the road to improve to 6-4 and 5-1 in conference. On Saturday, New Mexico went to Air Force. Air Force got the nice win there, 35-3, a big win over New Mexico, who's still winless in the Mountain West. Wyoming played Colorado State on the road there in Fort Collins. Boise State played Nevada on Saturday as well, got a big win, 41-3 on the road there in Reno. So Nevada, the Wolfpack, still winless in conference play as well. San Diego State hosted San Jose State and got a nice win over the Spartans, 43-27, putting them up to 6-4 6-4 overall, 4-2 in conference. San Jose State pretty evenly matched there, 6-3 overall and 4-2 in conference as well. And Utah State went out to Hawaii, and while Hawaii put up 34 points, Utah State was able to eke out the win, 41-34, late on Saturday. Looking forward to Week 12 in Mountain West play. On Friday, we've got San Diego State looking to get another big statement win over the Lobos of New Mexico on Friday evening at 9:45 p.m. on Fox Sports 1. On Saturday, Boise State is playing Wyoming, and I'll talk a little bit more about that game in a moment as well. But Colorado State is going to Air Force. Air Force a big favorite there. San Jose State going to Utah State and is a slight road favorite there against the Aggies. Fresno State is going to Nevada and plans to get a big win over the winless Wolfpack. And UNLV is traveling out to Hawaii to try to inch towards bowl eligibility. Technically, they've got 2 more games left in the season, and they just need 2 more games to be eligible. So they're 11-point road favorites. We'll see if they can get one step closer to bowl eligibility against the Rainbow Warriors this weekend. Last week in the Sun Belt on Thursday evening, Georgia Southern went to Louisiana, and the Ragin' Cajuns got a nice win, 36-17 at senior night in front of an unfortunately sparse crowd there in Lafayette. On Saturday, UL Monroe got a nice, perhaps a surprise win on the road at Georgia State. Georgia State, perhaps if they had a few more folks in the crowd there in Atlanta, a little home field advantage would have been helpful, as the Warhawks only won by 3 points there at Georgia State. James Madison in the Royal Rivalry over Old Dominion. First time these two teams have played in 10 years, although being in the same state, not far from each other at all. James Madison got a huge win, 37-3 in Norfolk over Old Dominion. So definitely James Madison continues to make a splash in the Sun Belt and in the FBS. Old Dominion trying to figure out where things are going wrong, trying to figure out what they can do to salvage the rest of their season, as they've got lots of injury issues there. We'll see if they can salvage things here, although they're not eligible for or not going to be eligible for a bowl game. Perhaps they can finish things out for pride. Arkansas State got a narrow win over UMass, of all teams, even at home, a narrow win, 35-33. Red Wolves may be wondering what's going on in Arkansas State right now, but a win is a win, so moving on. Troy got a even narrower win, 10-9 over Army. I don't even know what to say about that, but Troy's Carlton Marshall became the NCAA all-time leader in tackles in this game. Just an unbelievable record. Congrats to Carlton and the Troy Trojans football team, who improved to 8-2 overall and 5-1 in conference. That one loss, of course, just being the last-second walk-off Hail Mary loss at Appalachian State earlier this season. Really a strong season put together by Troy this year. Also on Saturday, App State went to Marshall and lost 21-28. That's all I care to say about that game. Congrats to Marshall on getting bowl eligible. Definitely played a dominant football game at home at the Joan. Marshall looking to move up the standings in the Sun Belt East as they play Georgia Southern this week as well, but we'll talk about that in a moment. South Alabama got a nice win, 38-21 over Texas State at home on Saturday, and Coastal defended the Teal Turf over Southern Miss with a fourth quarter touchdown to seal the deal over the Golden Eagles of Southern Miss. This week in Sun Belt play, Louisiana goes down to number 23, Florida State. Florida State heavily favored in that game, but we'll see if the Cajuns can give them a hard time there on Saturday. Georgia State is going to JMU, where JMU's a 9.5-point home favorite versus the Panthers. That should be an interesting game. I think it might be a little closer than that, but also JMU is just looking pretty dominant there in the Sun Belt East, and Georgia State's coming off a tough loss at home to the Warhawks of ULM. So we'll see how that one goes there. Old Dominion is traveling up to Boone to play App State this weekend on Saturday at 2:30. App is a 15.5-point home favorite, although they've been struggling this season, still looking for bowl eligibility. Unfortunately now, App has put themselves in the position where they need to beat Old Dominion this week and Georgia Southern at Paulson Stadium in the last week of the season to be bowl eligible. So uphill battle for the Mountaineers, but we'll see what they can do. The first step is this weekend hosting ODU at Kid Brewer Stadium. Coastal Carolina is supposed to play at Virginia this weekend, but unfortunately with the tragic occurrences at UVA this week, I'm not sure that game will be played. Of course, we're sending lots of love and positivity to the UVA family and community this week as they're dealing with this senseless loss. So Not going to take any time to preview this game right now just because I don't even know if it's going to be played. But again, just sending lots of positivity to the Cavaliers community and wishing them peace and justice as hopefully this horrific thing comes to a conclusion. Also in the Sun Belt this week, moving on there, we'll be talking about South Alabama at Southern Miss in my Game of the Week portion of this episode, so I'll hold off on talking much more about that. But UL Monroe is going to Troy. Troy's trying to improve to 6-1 in conference and 9-2 overall. UL Monroe technically, I believe, can still make a bowl game. They're 4-6 overall, so they would need to beat Troy and then win their last game of the season as well to get bowl eligible, but Troy is just looking pretty unstoppable at this point. Arkansas State is going to Texas State to play the Bobcats there in San Marcos. I see that kickoff weather is predicted to be 63 degrees and sunny. Being in Boone right now, it is freezing cold outside, so I just cannot imagine football in 63-degree weather right now. But anyway, that should be an interesting one. Both teams 3-7, just playing for pride at this point. But Texas State is the home favorite there in that game against the Red Wolves, who just barely escaped UMass this last week. And to round out our Sun Belt play this week, we've got Marshall playing at Georgia Southern at 6 p.m. On Saturday. Marshall is the road favorite there, but Paulson Stadium is a very difficult place to play. Marshall might be playing some better football right now. That's debatable. But Georgia Southern is trying to get bowl eligible. They need one more win to get bowl eligible. So I expect this to be a good, close game there at Paulson Stadium. We've got several rivalry games this week, and it starts on Tuesday evening between Bowling Green and Toledo. We've got the Battle of I-75, a contentious game between these two Ohio teams. These two teams have been playing since 1919, so 103 years, if my math serves me. And this has been a close series historically. Toledo with 42 wins, Bowling Green with 40, and 4 ties in the quick math. 86 times that these two teams have played. Toledo's the heavy favorite in this game. Toledo is just rolling this season. They're scoring 35 points a game and holding teams to 26. Meanwhile, Bowling Green is allowing 32 and only scoring 22. So I think the Rockets are gonna roll here. Learned an interesting fact on the Twitters this week, which is that the Rocket statue outside of Toledo Stadium is pointed directly at the center of Bowling Green's football stadium, which is, however many miles, dozens or hundreds of miles away. But yeah, the rivalry runs deep here in the I-75 rivalry. So this should be a good game to watch, even if I do think Toledo's probably going to run away with it. We'll see who ends up with the Battle of I-75 trophy. We've also got a good one, as I mentioned earlier, for the Michiganders. We've got Central Michigan versus Western Michigan Wednesday evening. They're playing for the Victory Cannon, and this is a game that's even older than the I-75 rivalry. It's been played since 1907. So these two teams are no strangers to each other. Western Michigan has 51 wins all time, and Central Michigan has 40, and there's been 2 ties. Most of the recent wins have gone to Western Michigan. However, Central won last year. However, looking forward to this year's Central Michigan is the heavy favorite, 70% chance to win according to ESPN Analytics. So we'll see who ends up with the win here. Both of these teams are allowing more points than they're earning per game, but the difference is a little smaller for Central Michigan. It's only a 2-point difference. So I think it has potential for an ugly game here. Western Michigan is coming off 2 straight losses to Bowling Green and NIU. Central Michigan coming off 2 straight wins to NIU and Buffalo. So Central probably does have the edge here, but it's a rivalry game, so anything can happen. Moving on to some Mountain West rivalries, we've got Air Force and Colorado State playing for the Ram Falcon Trophy. These two teams have been playing since 1957, so a lot of history here. Air Force has the lead historically of 37 wins to Colorado State's 21, including one tie between these two teams. This might be one of the more lopsided meetings between these two teams, as Air Force is expected to win with 95% chance to win this game over the Rams. The Rams, who are only scoring 13 points a game, and they're allowing 30 points a game. That's almost the exact opposite of Air Force. So this is probably going to be an ugly one in favor of Air Force, but it's a historic rivalry nonetheless. We've got another good rivalry game between Hawaii and UNLV. They're playing for the Island Showdown trophy. This is the 9th Island Showdown, and they've been playing each other since 1969. So UNLV only has 13 wins in the series compared to Hawaii's 18. So that's worth noting there, although the Rebels do have the latest win with a 27-13 win last year in this game. UNLV has the edge in this game this year as well. It's with a 68.1% chance to win. It does look like they have statistically they've got the better team here, but Hawaii is the home game here, so I think that gives them a little bit more of an advantage. We'll see what comes to be in this game late on Saturday. And our last rivalry game for the week is between Fresno State and Nevada. These two teams who've been playing each other since 1923. Fresno State has 30 wins, Nevada has 22, and there's one tie between these two teams. This is, again, one of the more lopsided, probably going to be one of the more lopsided meetings, as Fresno State is 6-4, 5-1 in conference. Nevada's 2-8 and 0-6 in conference. Yeah, Fresno State is scoring 30 points a game. Nevada's allowing 30 points a game compared to only gaining 19. And they just don't have, Nevada unfortunately just doesn't have much offense to speak of. Meanwhile, Fresno State is just throwing the ball like crazy behind Jake Haener. So things are looking like Fresno State this year in this matchup. Moving on to the G5 Hive Mind segment. Really appreciate everyone's submissions this week. We even lucked out with our first ever voice submission, so we'll get to that shortly. But I'll go ahead and start on Twitter. I'll start with a question that I'm not going to answer, actually. It's from Chris Coons at Automatic Chris on Twitter. He said, why is that a certain G5 Division Champs fan base can only manage to talk about a certain quote-unquote rival? I clarified with Chris that he was indeed talking about Coastal Carolina and App State fans. I asked for receipts. I was told that they were too ugly to share, so I'm not going to speak too much on it, except to say... while I'm no Coastal fan, they did solidify the Sun Belt East this past weekend, so they will be playing in Sun Belt Conference Championship. I think App fans are having a bit of a hard time with a few years of not being in that conference championship game, and certainly a disappointing season this year, even though they do still have the eligibility to play for a championship or for a bowl game. So I think that's all I'll say about that, Chris, but I do appreciate the conversation as always. I did have a couple of questions about Marshall. I'll start with this one from Fun in the Sun. They said that they would like me to talk about the Marshall app game and the repercussions from that. So Marshall app was an ugly one. I didn't want to talk much more about it, but Fun in the Sun really wanted me to, so here I am. This was a game that Marshall was essentially in control of from the beginning. They never trailed in this game. They held App to only scoring one touchdown in the first half, and it was with a minute left. The defense was just too good for App to get around. Although they had the same number of first downs, they had the same number of turnovers. It really came down to, and App even had the advantage in time of possession. It really just came down to what they were able to do when they had the ball. And Marshall was able to move the ball in ways that App State just could not. So looking at the ramifications standings-wise, Marshall's sitting at 4th in the Sun Belt East. App is sitting at 6th out of 7 in the Sun Belt East, which is really frustrating for App fans, I know. But it's looking like Marshall, and Marshall, of course, gained bowl eligibility with this win. So a big win at the Joan this weekend for the Herd. They play, and of course, Marshall plays at Georgia Southern this week, and then they close out their season with an interesting game at Georgia versus Georgia State. So if they can get a win at Georgia Southern this week, they're hosting a struggling Georgia State team. It's looking like Marshall could potentially pick up 2 more conference wins, which, depending on how things go, could end them up at second place in the conference, which would put them in line for a really nice bowl invitation. So things are looking good for Marshall. App has an uphill battle that I'm not pleased about. But I had another question from Go Herd Please Don't Die. Much appreciated as always. And I guess I kind of talked about that a little bit, but it's they want me to talk about Marshall in the crawl to bowl eligibility, and it has kind of felt like that for Marshall this year. They started off with wins versus Norfolk State and that big win at Notre Dame, but then they lost 3 out of the next 4, only picking up a win versus Gardner-Webb. Then they got a win versus James Madison, who's obviously doing really well this year, but then losing to Coastal, but then nice wins versus Old Dominion and App State. So it has been a slog for Marshall. Lots of back and forth. They are sitting at 3-3 in conference, 6-4 overall. But what it takes is just getting the wins, getting up to 6. No matter if it's back and forth every single week, as long as you're getting more wins than losses, then you're on the right path. So congrats to the Herd on their progress so far. It's been challenging, but great to watch. All right, the CUSA Curtain, also on Twitter at CUSA_Curtain, wants me to cover a few specific games. I'm going to roll through them kind of quickly. The first one is Western Kentucky at Auburn. Auburn has a slight edge here, but I think, like I said earlier, that's the SEC bias there. I think Western Kentucky is phenomenal this year. They're scoring 38 points a game, only allowing 21. Auburn is allowing 28 and only earning 23. So I think if Western Kentucky's defense can just make it challenging for the Tigers, I think Western Kentucky's offense is going to take care of business like they always do. So look for a quote-unquote upset there with the Hilltoppers there at Auburn. Let's see. We're moving on to Ohio Ball State, which I talked about a little bit as well. Ohio's rolling with win after win after win. Ball State is not doing poorly, but they're just not playing at the same level as Ohio right now. I've got the Bobcats to win there in Muncie versus Ball State this week. Mentioned earlier that Boise State is playing Wyoming this week. I do have Boise State to win this game. They're just scoring so many points. So many more points than they're allowing. Their defense is doing really well this year, especially against the run, only allowing 107 rushing yards per game. And while Wyoming relies on the run, I think if Boise can stop it, which I think that they will, then they've got a really good chance in this game. They also asked me to talk about Coastal and Virginia, which I already addressed earlier in the episode. I appreciate you wanting me to talk about this one. I think it has potential to be a good game if and when it is played, but again, just going to take some time to let things settle there with that situation before providing any in-depth preview on that one. And lastly, Marshall versus Georgia Southern, what is sure to be a close game this week. In fact, ESPN agrees. They give Marshall a 51.2% chance to win this game, coming off of nice wins versus App and ODU. Georgia Southern with losses to South Alabama and the Ragin' Cajuns of Louisiana. This one has big implications for standings in the Sun Belt East. Georgia Southern there at 5th in the East, Marshall at 4th. Georgia Southern also playing for bowl eligibility with this game, so we will see if they're able to get it done at home against the Herd this weekend. Appreciate the question, CSA Curtain, and our interactions on Twitter, as always. Much appreciated. And as promised, we got our first ever voice message submission from Jason Williams. So let's hear from Jason now.
First, thank you for taking the time to answer these questions that many fans may have. Mine is simply around bowl clarification. I've noticed that record doesn't always play in for the Sun Belt teams as much as I would think to the bowl that you are going to be going to. A lot of the projections have teams with lesser wins and more losses going to bowls with higher payouts, such as the Cure in Boca Raton for Georgia Southern or Marshall, compared to a South Alabama projected to go to the Camellia Bowl. I realize the Camellia Bowl is in Alabama, but the $300,000 payout compared to a $800,000 to over $1 million payout, that's a big difference. You would think your higher seeded Sun Belt Group of 5 team would get the bigger payout bowl. Also, if you could discuss Sun Belt's chances to tie into the Independence in Birmingham Bowl, I have seen Louisiana tied into the Independence. Thank you. Goodbye.
All right, Jason, thank you so much for that question. There's a lot in there, some of which I'm not, frankly, knowledgeable enough to share about, but I did find a few resources specifically about payouts and the importance of those payouts and where that money actually goes. So I'll share a couple of links in the show notes here to just shed some light on that a little bit. I did want to discuss the Independence Bowl earlier this month, I believe, on November 3rd. The Sun Belt and the Independence Bowl announced an agreement. It is a backup agreement for the Sun Belt. So as we're talking about tie-ins and predictions, I don't have that deep information to share with you. However, I can say that I've seen the University of Louisiana tied to this bowl game as well. I usually follow folks like Brett McMurphy on Twitter to get some of those predictions. There's just so much that goes into those of who's eligible, who would pass, why would they pass, who would the bowls want to overlook. So I'm not prepared to make any sort of prediction on that, but Brett McMurphy in his most recent predictions for the Independence Bowl has Louisiana versus Tulane. They're in Shreveport, Louisiana on Friday, December 23rd. So that would be an interesting game. I would very much like to see that, although I think the Green Wave would probably do some work on the Cajuns in that game. But there's that one. And then you also mentioned the Birmingham Bowl. The Birmingham Bowl's tie-ins are kind of complicated, but it's looking like the American Athletic Conference and possibly an independent like BYU might be playing this year. That's a Brett McMurphy prediction. I do believe that the Birmingham Bowl has SEC ties and perhaps even Conference USA ties as well. Again, not deeply familiar with how that works, but yeah, it's always interesting to keep an eye on how those things might play out. I personally would really enjoy seeing BYU Memphis in that Birmingham Bowl, so we'll see how that does end up playing out. But thanks again, Jason. Really appreciate your question and for sending in a voice message, the first one of the season. Really enjoy these G5 Hive Mind sessions, so don't hesitate to reach out with those. Keep an eye out on Sundays and Mondays for my Hive Mind tweets and posts on Facebook and Instagram to connect and ask me your questions or let me know things that you'd like me to take a look at or talk about for the upcoming week. Moving on to my matchup of the week. This week, my matchup of the week is between the South Alabama Jaguars and the Southern Miss Golden Eagles. This matchup is on Saturday, November 19th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, and you can watch it on NFL Network. To help me preview this game, I reached out to the guys at To The Top Talk, as well as Doug Kunkel, who covers the South Alabama Jaguar site on 247sports.com. Let's hear from them now.
What's going on? What's happening? How you guys doing? This is Jamie Arrington from To The Top Talk, here to talk about Southern Miss versus South Alabama this weekend. Shout out to Brian at the Group of Five Focus podcast for inviting us on this week. So first, we'll talk about what I know best, which is Southern Miss football. This is the second year of head coach Will Hall's tenure, and he's made a dramatic turnaround from 2021 to 2022. The win total has already increased with 2 games left to play, and you can kind of see the momentum moving in the right direction. Now, that being said, the Golden Eagles are a very inexperienced team and are progressing as the year goes along, but there's been a lot of uncertainty, particularly at the quarterback position, that's made an impact on this season as a whole, so we'll start there. I would fully expect the starting quarterback this weekend to be Trey Lowe. Trey started off last season before he was injured, and found himself down on the depth chart. Now he is the lead dog after an injury and some benchings. He's the lead dog and has been pretty solid in his 2 appearances the past 2 weeks. So hoping for some stability there. Definitely a good game manager. Game manager had no turnovers last week, which has not been the norm for Southern Miss quarterbacks this season. From there, you've got Frank Gore Jr., the starting running back. Frank Gore Jr., one of the best, all-purpose backs in the group of 5. Frank is somebody that you'll see rushing the ball, receiving from the backfield, as well as under center. That doesn't really that term hasn't existed since like 2005. Frank will be sometimes in the shotgun as what we call a super back. You may refer to it as a wild back. Southern Miss, we call that a super back. Jason Brownlee, very, very strong receiver. His numbers aren't quite what they could be, just with the uncertainty at quarterback this year, but very, very strong wide receiver that commands attention. The line up front, been moving them around a little bit. So there is some uncertainty also with the O-line. Didn't play very well at all last year. This year they've made progress, but still some gaps, still some holes that need to be filled there. Defense has really been where Southern Miss has shined this year. Have had a very, very strong season. Had some very impressive games. Now they've given up some big plays. That's as the style they play is want to do. But defense has been very, very strong. Special teams as well. Had a solid season from our kicker and our punter. So there you have it for the Southern Miss Golden Eagles. So you look across the aisle and you've got South Alabama, the Jaguars, coached by a former Golden Eagle football player and assistant coach in Kane Womack, and they have had a much different year from the Golden Eagles. They've capitalized on some of the experience that they had. They've done a good job of bringing in transfers and are currently sitting at 8-2 on the season and 5-1 in the Sun Belt. Meanwhile, Southern Miss 5-5 overall and 3-3 in Conference USA. Southern Miss on a 2-game losing streak, falling 2 weeks ago to Georgia State and last week to Coastal Carolina, while South Alabama is on a 3-game winning streak. So kind of 2 teams heading in different directions right now, all coming to a head this Saturday, 2:30 p.m. in Hattiesburg. So what's going to happen in this game? I think it's going to be a pretty low scoring game. The over-under in this game is 45.5. That feels fair. The Jaguars are favored for a reason right now. Southern Miss has had some inconsistencies, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. South Alabama has fared a little bit better there. South Alabama looks to have a very, very strong rushing defense. Southern Miss does too, although in yardage so far this season, South Alabama has the edge. South Alabama is 2-0 versus Southern Miss in football. And South Alabama is 2-0 versus Southern Miss in football all time. And this is something that I think snuck up on a lot of Golden Eagles. So 2 of the worst years in Southern Miss football history. They got the best of the Golden Eagles. So that's why we play the game this Saturday on the NFL Network if you can't make it down to Hattiesburg. Well, I appreciate you guys for having us on. Hope that sheds some light on the game this weekend. And Southern Miss to the top. Talk.
This Saturday, South Alabama heads to Hattiesburg, just 90 miles away from their own campus in Mobile, hoping to stretch their winning streak in this series to 3 games in 3 years. The first 2 games were out-of-conference games in 2020 and 2021, and South Alabama won both of them quite handily. Probably a very surprising start for the South Alabama program and their fans looking back on it, as Southern Mississippi was absolutely an inspiration to the folks in Mobile when they were starting their own program back in 2008. The history of Southern Mississippi, the culture they have there, is certainly that every mid-major or G5 or however you want to call them program looks to emulate. South Alabama is going to go in expecting a Southern Miss team that's going to stay dedicated to the run. It's what they've really tried to establish as their identity with Will Hall as the coach. And they're dedicated to it, even if perhaps they're not always great at it. And South Alabama, with one of the top rushing defenses in the nation, is going to be able to do a lot to control that game without committing a bunch of players up front to do so. So they'll be able to work their coverages probably like they would prefer to do, although they have been vulnerable to the pass at times this year. And Southern Miss is going to have to throw the ball. They're going to have a chance in this game, in my opinion. Offensively for South Alabama, Carter Bradley just set the program record for touchdowns in a season with 19. Of course, it's not a big number, and it's not a long history for the program, but he has absolutely had a great year. Fantastic receiving core with Jalen Wayne, who is the cousin of former NFL star receiver Reggie Wayne, Colin Lacey, and Devin Voisin, the third receiver, has been a revelation this season. Another deep target for Bradley to work in. Good tight ends, solid run blocking, very physical. LaDainian Webb, the running back, junior college transfer out of Jones County, and before that he was at Florida State, has been a dynamo when healthy. He might be banged up for this game, though, so it's uncertain if we'll see him or if we'll see more of the other running backs that have made an impact this year. That would be Omni Wells, who transferred in from Mississippi State, and Marco Lee, a transfer from Virginia Tech. He's probably been the primary guy for them. With Braylon McReynolds, a freshman, kind of a little bit of a lightning injection when he comes in there. He's able to move the ball very quickly. So those are probably your impact guys to keep an eye out for on offense for South Alabama. On defense, Darrell Luter, the cornerback's one of their top prospects. Up front, Wacavius Thomas, the nose guard, is a star player for sure. And when you look at the linebacking core, there's plenty of quality depth there as well. So the fans from South Alabama will certainly make the trip. I was going to say a long trip, but it's not a very long trip, to Hattiesburg for this game. They have in the past for other sports where there's been quite a rivalry already between the schools. But I expect a pretty strong South Alabama contingent. I expect a fired-up Southern Mississippi crowd as they need this win to get to bowl eligibility with only 5 right now and 2 left to play. South Alabama, meanwhile, deeply into uncharted territory with 8 wins already in the season. They never had 6 before as an FBS team. So they're really hoping to make it 9, 10, maybe even 11. Who knows, maybe even 12 if they get a chance to play in the Sun Belt Conference Championship game. So a ton riding on this game. It's almost a neighborhood rivalry. I expect to see a lot of good football, and very excited to watch this on the NFL Network on Saturday at 2:30 Central.
Thanks, guys. Great coverage as always. Really appreciate the insight. I think this is going to be a great Sun Belt West matchup here between the Jaguars and the Golden Eagles, especially in Hattiesburg. I know that South Alabama is the favorite here, expected to win with 62.5% by ESPN Analytics, but I think this one could be a real dogfight. I think that Southern Miss, although coming off of some tough losses to Georgia State and at Coastal, I think especially last week at Coastal, they showed a lot of potential there. I think Will Hall is a creative coach, and I think that their record 5-5 and 3-3, they're pretty even. But they do have some nice wins versus Texas State and Louisiana recently. So I think that Southern Miss could make this very, very interesting. I do think this one's going to be close, but I'm going to lean South Alabama. I think that quarterback Carter Bradley for the Jaguars is having a sensational year with 19 touchdowns and over 2,500 passing yards. Southern Miss gets really creative with the ball. They've been passing a lot more this season. They run their super back, with Frank Gore Jr., who is just a very talented athlete. But I think that South Alabama is just going to have the edge in this game, just slightly. I'm going to predict that the Jaguars win 28-23 there in Hattiesburg this weekend. Thanks for joining me this week on the Group of 5 Focus podcast. Reach out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at G5FPod to join the conversation and let me know what you think about my picks and previews. And if you haven't already, please follow, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice. And be sure to share it with your favorite Group of 5 fans. That's all for this week of the Group of 5 Focus podcast. Special thanks to Doug Conkle and the guys at To The Top Talk for their help previewing the game of the week. Be sure to check this episode description for their Twitter handles and give them a follow to keep up with all things USM and South Alabama. But until next time, my question for you is, what is one thing you can do to showcase the power of the Group of 5?